The twin moons of VR hung like watchful eyes in the night sky, their pale light spilling across the crystalline spires of the royal palace. Princess Alira Valier stood alone on her balcony, her slender fingers gripping the railing as she stared up at the heavens. Tomorrow would be her wedding day, the day she would be bound forever to a human. A human. The very thought made her stomach churn. Alira's silver-flecked skin shimmered in the moonlight as she took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. From childhood, she had been taught that humans were little more than vermin, primitive, unclean creatures who had somehow managed to achieve spaceflight through brute force rather than the refined technological prowess of the Viarian people. And yet, here she was, about to marry one of them, Captain Marcus Holt, decorated war hero of the human forces, ally to the Viarian crown in their ongoing struggle against the Drezek Imperium. A political marriage, a necessity. Her regent had insisted. An honor. The court had echoed. A nightmare. Alira knew. "Your Highness." The voice of her handmaiden, Nyla, pulled her from her thoughts. "The final fitting for your ceremonial attire awaits." Alira nodded, her face a perfect mask of royal composure. Years of court training had taught her to hide her true feelings beneath a veneer of serene acceptance. But inside, she was screaming. The wedding chambers were a flurry of activity. Servants rushed about, carrying elaborate crystal decorations and delicate bioluminescent flowers that would adorn the sacred hall. The High Priestess Leora oversaw the preparations, her ancient eyes watching Alira with a mixture of sympathy and resolve. "The ceremonial bindings must be precise," Leora instructed, as Alira was fitted with the traditional silver thread garments of a royal bride. "The union of your bloodline with the human's will be sealed through the ancient rites." "Will it hurt?" Alira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The High Priestess hesitated. "The bonding ritual connects life energies. There is discomfort, but it passes." What she didn't say, what Alira already knew, was that the ritual would bind her not just to the human, but to his very essence. His sweat, his breath, his everything. The thought made her shudder. "Regent Valcor wishes to speak with you," Nyla announced, appearing at the chamber entrance. Alira's guardian and regent since her parents' death. Valcor was a tall, imposing figure, with the characteristic silver markings of Viarian nobility etched across his angular features. He entered the chamber with the confident stride of one accustomed to command. "Leave us," he ordered the servants, who quickly dispersed. Even the High Priestess bowed and retreated to a respectful distance. "My dear princess," Valcor said, his voice honey-smooth, "are you prepared for tomorrow's union?" "As prepared as one can be to marry a human," Alira replied, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Valcor's expression hardened momentarily before softening into a practiced smile. "This alliance is crucial. The human armies have proven unexpectedly effective against the Drezek, and Captain Holt commands significant respect among their forces. So I'm to be the prize. The royal trinket offered to keep the humans fighting our war. You are to be a queen who understands sacrifice for her people," Valcor corrected sharply. "Your parents would expect no less." The mention of her parents stung. King Raylan and Queen Mira had died when Alira was just 14. A tragic accident during a diplomatic mission. Or so the official story went. 6 years had passed, and Valcor had ruled as regent ever since, postponing Alira's coronation with a series of bureaucratic delays and arcane legal maneuvers. "I understand my duty," Alira said finally, lowering her eyes in submission, a gesture that satisfied Valcor, though he couldn't see her fingers curling into tight fists at her sides. "Excellent. The human arrives tonight for the pre-wedding rituals. Try not to appear too disgusted." With that, Valcor swept from the room, his ceremonial robes trailing behind him. Once alone, Alira sought out her one true confidant in the palace. Tutor Saras had been her teacher since childhood, a gentle soul who had instructed her in everything from the complex history of VR to the delicate art of quantum crystalline manipulation that was the hallmark of Vyarian technology. She found him in the palace library, his aged form bent over ancient texts. "Ah, my princess," Saras smiled, his wrinkled face lighting up at the sight of her. "Come to escape the wedding preparations, have we?" "I'm to marry a human tomorrow, Saras," Alira said, sinking into a chair beside him. "How can I possibly do this?" Saras closed his book and regarded her thoughtfully. "Humans are not what our histories have portrayed them to be, Princess. They are different, yes, but perhaps not in the ways you've been taught to believe." "They're dirty," Alira insisted. "Their skin is rough and covered in hair. They sweat and smell and they feel joy and pain," Saras interrupted gently. "They create art and music. They love their children. They dream." Alira frowned. "You sound like you admire them." "I observe," Saras corrected. "Something you might consider doing before passing judgment." "I don't have that luxury. By tomorrow night, I'll be bound to one forever." The reality of it pressed down on her like a physical weight. "The ceremonial binding. Saras. They say it connects life energies. That I'll feel what he feels. That our very essences will intermingle." She shuddered at the thought. Saras's expression grew serious. "The binding ritual is ancient and powerful. But remember, Princess, true bonds cannot be forced. They must be freely given." Before Alira could question him further, a distant explosion rocked the palace. The crystal chandeliers swayed dangerously, and dust rained down from the ornate ceiling. "What was that?" Alira gasped. Saras was already on his feet, surprisingly spry for his age. "Come, Princess. We must get you to safety." They had barely reached the corridor when palace guards rushed past, weapons drawn. Shouts and the sound of energy weapons discharging echoed through the hallways. "Rebel attack!" one guard called out as he passed. "Protect the princess!" Alira froze. The Drazic sympathizers, a faction of Vyarians who believed alliance with the Drazic Imperium was preferable to cooperation with humans, had threatened violence before, but never so boldly as to attack the palace itself. "This way," Saras urged, pulling her toward a hidden passage behind a decorative wall panel. "The royal safe room." Another explosion, closer this time. The floor beneath them shook violently, and a section of the ceiling collapsed, separating Alira from her tutor. "Saras!" she cried out, but there was no response from the other side of the rubble. Heart pounding, Alira fled back toward her chambers, hoping to find palace guards who could escort her to safety. But the hallways were in chaos, servants running in panic, guards engaged in firefights with black-clad figures wielding Drazic energy weapons. She slipped into a side corridor, then another, becoming disoriented in the maze-like palace that had suddenly transformed from sanctuary to battlefield. Finally, she reached her private chambers and rushed to the balcony, hoping to signal the palace guards in the gardens below. But as she stepped onto the balcony, a dark figure rose up from where they had been climbing the ornate latticework. A rebel assassin, face obscured by a breathing mask, weapon raised. "Death to the human lover!" the assassin snarled and fired. Alira closed her eyes, certain her death had come. But instead of the burning pain of an energy blast, she felt herself tackled roughly to the ground. Someone had pushed her out of the way. She opened her eyes to see a large figure wrestling with the assassin. In the moonlight, she could make out the distinctive uniform of the human military forces. The human grappled with the assassin, knocking the weapon from their hands. The fight was brutal and quick, the human's movements efficient and deadly. Within moments, the assassin lay unconscious. The human turned to her, and in the pale light of the twin moons, Alira saw his face for the first time. Captain Marcus Holt was not what she had expected. His features were strong, with a jaw shadowed by short facial hair and eyes that held both weariness and determination. A scar ran from his right temple to his cheek, a testament to battles fought and survived. "Princess," he said, his voice deep and rougher than the refined tones she was accustomed to hearing at court. "Are you hurt?" Alira stared at him, momentarily speechless. Up close, a human was even more alien than she had imagined. His skin lacked the silvery luminescence of Viarians, instead appearing tan and weathered. And yes, there was that faint scent. Not unpleasant, exactly, but distinctly human, earthy, primal. No, I'm unharmed," she managed to say, scrambling backward, away from him. Marcus seemed to notice her revulsion. Something flickered in his eyes, hurt, perhaps, or resignation, but he made no comment. Instead, he moved to the balcony edge and surveyed the grounds below. "More rebels in the East Wing," he reported. "And it looks like they've disabled the palace defense grid." He turned back to her. "This isn't a random attack. They're targeting you specifically." "How would you know that?" Alira demanded, suspicion flaring. "Because I've spent the past month studying every detail about this palace and its security in preparation for our wedding," he answered bluntly. "And because 3 different assassination attempts on you have been thwarted in the past week. Information your regent apparently didn't share with you." Before Alira could process this revelation, the door to her chambers burst open. She expected palace guards, but instead, 3 more black-clad rebels stormed in, weapons raised. Marcus moved with surprising speed. He shoved Alira behind him, drew a sidearm from his belt, and fired in one fluid motion. 2 rebels fell, but the third got off a shot that seared past them, igniting the delicate curtains. "We need to move," Marcus said, grabbing her arm. "Now." "Don't touch me!" Alira recoiled from his grip. Marcus's expression hardened. "Princess, with all due respect, we can discuss your aversion to human contact after we're both not dead. Now move." The authority in his voice, so different from the deferential tones court officials used with her, shocked Alira into compliance. She followed him through the burning chamber and into the corridor beyond. The palace was in full chaos now. Guards and rebels exchanged fire, and the once pristine hallways were scarred with blast marks and scattered debris. "Where are we going?" Alira asked, as Marcus led her through a service corridor she hadn't known existed. "Somewhere they won't look for you," he replied tersely. "The rebels have infiltrated the palace guard. We can't trust anyone right now." "That's absurd. My people would never—" "Princess," Marcus cut her off. "The assassin on your balcony was wearing a modified palace guard uniform under that black tactical gear. Someone inside your court wants you dead." The implication sent a chill through Alira. If what Marcus said was true, nowhere in the palace was safe. But to leave with him, a human she had just met, who had touched her with his bare hands, was unthinkable. And yet, as another explosion rocked the palace behind them, she realized she had no choice. They reached a small courtyard where a sleek military transport waited, its engines humming quietly. A woman stood beside it, also in human military uniform, her hand resting on a holstered weapon. Her dark hair was cropped short, and her eyes scanned the surroundings with practiced vigilance. "Lieutenant Marashai," Marcus introduced briefly. "My second in command." The woman nodded curtly. "Captain, Princess." Her gaze lingered on Alira for just a moment, her expression unreadable. "Perimeters secure, but not for long." "The safe house?" Marcus asked. "Prepped and ready." Alira looked between them. "Safe house? What safe house? I'm not leaving the palace." Marcus turned to her, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Princess, there is a coordinated assassination attempt against you happening right now. Your palace has been compromised. We need to get you to a secure location until we can determine who's behind this. And I'm supposed to just trust you? A human I've never met? Considering I've taken 3 plasma burns saving your life in the last 10 minutes. Yes, Marcus replied flatly. Besides, killing my bride-to-be would be a poor start to married life, don't you think? Lieutenant Shy made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Before Alira could formulate a suitably scathing response, the courtyard doors burst open, and palace guards spilled through, but their weapons were trained on Marcus and Shy, not searching for rebels. Stand down, human, the lead guard commanded. Release the princess immediately. Marcus's hand moved to his weapon, but he didn't draw. Princess, he said quietly. Those aren't loyal guards. Look at their insignias. Alira squinted in the dim light and saw what Marcus had already noticed. The royal crest on their uniforms was subtly wrong, missing the third crystal that represented the ancient house of Lyre. Imposters, she whispered. Last chance, Marcus said to her. Stay and risk capture, or come with us now. In that moment, as plasma fire erupted around them, and Lieutenant Shir returned fire from behind the transport, Alira made her choice. She stepped toward the transport. Go, Marcus ordered, providing covering fire as Alira scrambled aboard with Shy close behind. The last thing Alira saw as the transport doors sealed was Marcus diving in after them. A plasma burst scorching the ground where he had stood a second before. Then they were airborne, the palace falling away beneath them as they shot into the night sky. Alira huddled in a corner of the transport, as far from the humans as the small space would allow. Her world had just been shattered in the span of minutes. Her palace, her home, attacked. Her people turning against her. And now she was fleeing with 2 humans to an unknown destination. Lieutenant Shur piloted the craft with expert precision, navigating the dense crystalline towers of the capital city before angling toward the outskirts. Where are you taking me? Alira demanded. Marcus, checking a wound on his arm where a plasma shot had grazed him, looked up. Somewhere the rebels won't think to look for a princess. The human quarter. Alira felt the blood drain from her face. The human quarter, the section of the capital where human diplomats, traders, and military personnel were permitted to reside, was notorious among Vierians for its squalor and barbarism. No Vierian of noble birth had set foot there in living memory. I can't go there, she protested. It's dirty, Marcus supplied, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Unclean? Beneath your royal dignity? Probably. But it's also the one place on this planet where you'll be safe tonight. He wrapped a bandage around his arm, wincing slightly. Besides, Princess, if we're to be married tomorrow, you might as well see how the other half lives. Alira had no response to that. She turned away, staring out the viewport as the gleaming spires of the Vierian elite quarters gave way to the dimmer, more utilitarian structures of the human district. Her heart sank as the transport began its descent into what looked to her like another world entirely, a world she had never wanted to see, let alone enter. The transport touched down in a small, enclosed landing pad atop a nondescript building. As the engines powered down, Alira steeled herself for whatever lay beyond the transport doors. Whatever indignities awaited her in the human quarter, she would endure them with the poise and composure befitting a princess of VR, even if it killed her. Which, given the events of the past hour, seemed increasingly likely. The human quarter assaulted Alira's senses the moment she stepped from the transport. The air was thicker here, laden with unfamiliar scents, cooking food, machinery, and the unmistakable musk of too many humans in too small a space. The sounds, too, were jarring. Raucous laughter from nearby establishments, the hum of primitive electrical systems, and music that seemed to consist primarily of pounding rhythms with little of the harmonic complexity valued in Vierian compositions. Marcus led her down from the rooftop landing pad into the building proper, with Lieutenant Shui bringing up the rear, her vigilant eyes constantly scanning for threats. "Welcome to the safe house," Marcus said as they entered a spartanly furnished apartment. "It's not what you're used to, but it's secure." Alira took in the space with barely concealed horror. Compared to her palace chambers, this dwelling was barely more than a box. The furniture was functional rather than beautiful, made from materials that lacked the crystalline purity of Vierian craftsmanship. The lighting was harsh and artificial, nothing like the soft bioluminescence that illuminated the palace. "This is where you live?" she asked, unable to keep the disdain from her voice. "No," Marcus replied. "My quarters at the military compound are even smaller. This is a diplomatic safe house, maintained for emergencies. Like, say, when a princess needs to disappear for a night." Lieutenant Shure moved through the space with practiced efficiency, checking security systems and peering through the slats of window blinds to the street below. "Perimeter's clear," she reported. "I'll take first watch." She glanced at Alira, then back to Marcus. "Try not to kill each other before the wedding." With that, she stepped into an adjoining room, leaving Alira alone with her unwanted fiancé. An awkward silence stretched between them. Alira remained standing near the door, unwilling to touch anything in this human space. Marcus, seemingly unbothered by her discomfort, removed his outer tactical gear and set about treating the plasma burn on his arm more thoroughly. "You're injured," Alira observed, more to break the silence than out of genuine concern. "It's nothing," Marcus dismissed. "Plasma graze. I've had worse." The casualness with which he discussed his wound intrigued Alira despite herself. Vierian nobility were sheltered from physical harm their entire lives. Pain was something that happened to others, to servants and soldiers and, yes, to humans. "You saved my life," she acknowledged reluctantly. "I should. Thank you for that." Marcus looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "You're welcome, Princess. Though I was just doing my job." "Your job?" "Protecting the alliance between our peoples. Keeping you alive is rather essential to that goal." He finished bandaging his arm and rolled down his sleeve. "Hungry? We have rations." The thought of consuming human food turned Alira's stomach. "I'll pass." Marcus shrugged and went to a small food preparation area, returning with some kind of packaged substance that he began to eat without ceremony. Alira watched him with a mixture of fascination and revulsion. Humans ate like that? Without proper utensils or preparation rituals? "So," Marcus said between bites, "since we have some time before our wedding tomorrow, assuming the palace is secured by then, perhaps we should get to know each other a bit." "What is there to know?" Alira replied coldly. "You're a human military captain chosen for a political marriage. I'm a Vierian princess fulfilling my duty to the crown. Our personal feelings are irrelevant." Marcus studied her for a moment. "Is that what they taught you in the palace? That feelings are irrelevant?" "Duty comes before personal desire, always." "And what about choice? Does duty come before that too?" The question caught Alira off guard. Choice was not something often discussed in royal education. There were traditions, expectations, protocols. But choice? The concept seemed almost foreign. "A princess serves her people," she said finally. "Personal choice is a luxury reserved for commoners." Marcus set down his food, his expression thoughtful. "Where I come from, Princess, choice is not a luxury. It's a right. Even for those in positions of authority, perhaps especially for them." "How convenient for you," Alira replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "And yet, here you are, entering a political marriage with someone who clearly doesn't want you. Where is your precious choice in that?" "I volunteered," Marcus said simply. Alira stared at him. "You... what?" "I volunteered for this marriage," he repeated. "When the alliance was proposed, Your regent requested a high-ranking human officer. I stepped forward. Why would you do that? Alira asked, genuinely puzzled. Why willingly bind yourself to someone who considers your entire species barely above animals? Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she refused to give him the satisfaction. Because I believe in the Alliance, he said finally. Because I've seen what the Drazek do to worlds they conquer, and I won't let that happen to either of our peoples. And because... He hesitated. Because, Alira prompted, suddenly curious despite herself. Because I thought that maybe, just maybe, this marriage could be more than a political arrangement. That it could be a first step toward real understanding between humans and Viarians. A rueful smile touched his lips. Though I see now that was perhaps overly optimistic. Alira didn't know how to respond to that. The human was nothing like what she had expected. There was a directness to him, an honesty that was rarely found in the Viarian court, where words were crafted like delicate crystal sculptures, beautiful but often hollow. Before she could formulate a response, Lieutenant Scher returned from the adjoining room. Captain, we have a problem, she said tersely. Palace communications are reporting that the princess was kidnapped by human forces during the attack. They're blaming us for the assault. What? Alira exclaimed. That's absurd. Is it? Marcus asked grimly. Or is it the perfect way to sabotage the Alliance? Blame humans for an attack on the beloved princess, turn public opinion against us, and justify breaking the treaty. Regent Valcor would never, Alira began, but stopped short. Would he? The regent had always been ambitious, his loyalty to the crown seemingly absolute. But he had also been the most vocal critic of the human alliance in private council meetings, only reluctantly agreeing to the marriage pact after other council members insisted. We need to get back to the palace, she said, suddenly decisive. I need to speak to Valcor directly, to understand what's happening. Walking back into the palace now would be suicide, Shai pointed out. If someone wants you dead, princess, that's the first place they'll look. Then, what do you suggest? Alira demanded. That I hide here in this human dwelling while my people believe I've been kidnapped? Marcus and Shai exchanged a look that Alira couldn't quite interpret. No, Marcus said finally. But we need to be strategic. First, we gather information. Then we plan our next move. He turned to Shai. Contact our intelligence assets in the capital. Find out what's really happening at the palace. And see if you can reach Tutor Saras. He might be our only ally inside. She nodded and moved to a communications terminal in the corner. As for you, Princess, Marcus continued, I suggest you get some rest. Tomorrow will be complicated. Alira wanted to argue, to insist on action rather than waiting. But exhaustion suddenly washed over her. The events of the night, the attack, the flight, the revelations, had drained her more than she realized. Where am I supposed to rest in this place? She asked, looking around the sparse apartment. Marcus pointed to a door. Bedroom's through there. It's clean, I promise. The slight emphasis on clean wasn't lost on Alira. She raised her chin, refusing to show any embarrassment over her earlier disgust. Very well, she said with as much dignity as she could muster. Wake me if there's news. As she turned to go, Marcus called after her. Princess, for what it's worth, I'm sorry about all this. Not how I imagined our first meeting would go. Alira paused but didn't turn around. And how did you imagine it, Captain? With a lot less plasma fire, for starters, he replied, a hint of humor in his voice. And maybe with you looking at me like I'm a person, not a disease. The honesty of his answer struck her like a physical blow. Without responding, she entered the bedroom and closed the door firmly behind her. Alone at last. Alira surveyed the bedroom with wary eyes. Like the rest of the apartment, It was utilitarian. A simple bed, a small storage unit, a window covered with blinds. Nothing like the luxurious chambers she was accustomed to. And yet, as she cautiously sat on the edge of the bed, she was surprised to find it comfortable. She had no nightclothes, no servants to help her undress, none of the elaborate bedtime rituals that had structured her life since childhood. Instead, she simply removed her outer robe and lay down fully clothed, too exhausted to care about propriety for once. As sleep began to claim her, Alira's thoughts drifted to the human captain. Marcus Holt was not what she had expected. Not at all. And that realization troubled her more than she cared to admit. Morning light filtered through the blinds, waking Alira from a fitful sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then, the events of the previous night came rushing back. The attack, the flight, the safe house in the human quarter. She sat up quickly, her royal training asserting itself even in these bizarre circumstances. A princess did not lie abed, regardless of the situation. She straightened her rumpled clothing as best she could and smoothed her hair, wishing desperately for a proper grooming chamber in attendance. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Marcus and Lieutenant Shy hunched over a holographic display, studying what appeared to be palace schematics. They looked up at her approach, and Alira was struck by how tired they both appeared. Had they been up all night? "Princess," Marcus acknowledged, "I hope you were able to rest." "Adequately," she replied stiffly. "What news from the palace?" The look that passed between the two humans sent a chill down Alira's spine. "It's not good," Marcus said grimly. The official story being circulated is that human separatists attacked the palace and kidnapped you to prevent the alliance. Regent Valcor has suspended all diplomatic relations with human territories and ordered human vessels to leave Viarian space within 48 hours. That's madness," Alira stammered. "The alliance took years to negotiate. He can't simply dissolve it overnight." "He can if he claims humans violated it first by attacking the royal family," Shire pointed out. "But that's a lie. You saved me from the real attackers." "And who's going to believe that?" Marcus asked. "Your word against the regent's. Even if we got you back to the palace safely, he could claim you were coerced or confused by the trauma." Alira paced the small living area, her mind racing. "There must be someone who would listen. The High Council is firmly under Valcor's control," Marcus finished for her. "We've been monitoring the situation all night. He's moved quickly to consolidate power, claiming emergency authority in your absence. What about Tutor Saras? Did you contact him?" Marcus and Shy exchanged another look. "What?" Alira demanded. "Tell me!" "Tutor Saras has been arrested," Shur said quietly, "charged with conspiracy to aid the human kidnappers." Alira felt as though the floor had dropped out from beneath her. Saras, her teacher, her friend, the one person in the palace who had always treated her as more than just a royal figurehead, accused of treason. "This is a coup," she realized aloud. "Valcor is using the attack and my disappearance to seize power." "That's our assessment as well," Marcus agreed. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Alira stopped pacing and faced the two humans. For the first time since meeting them, she looked at them, really looked at them, not as alien creatures but as potential allies. "We go back," she said firmly. "We expose Valcor's lies. I will not hide while he uses my name to destroy everything my parents built." "And how exactly do we do that?" Shy asked. "The palace is locked down tight. Every human in the capital is being watched. We'd never get within a kilometer of the gates. Not as humans." "No," Alira conceded. "But I'm still the princess, and tomorrow is still supposed to be my wedding day." Marcus's eyes widened slightly as he caught her meaning. "You want to go through with the ceremony?" "I want to use the ceremony," Alira corrected. Every noble house will be in attendance. It will be broadcast throughout the system. What better time to reveal Valkor's treachery? It's risky, Shai warned. If Valkor realizes you're not under his control, then we'll have to ensure he doesn't realize it until it's too late. Alira interrupted. I've spent my life navigating the treacherous currents of court politics. Lieutenant, this is just another performance. Marcus studied her, a new respect evident in his gaze. You're braver than I gave you credit for, Princess. I'm Vierian royalty, Captain, she replied coolly. Courage is expected, not commended. Despite her words, Alira felt a small glow of pride at his acknowledgement. The respect of this human warrior, earned, not given due to her title, felt strangely satisfying. If we're going to do this, Marcus said, turning back to the palace schematics, we need to understand exactly what Valkor is planning. A normal ceremonial route would take us through here, and here. He traced paths through the holographic display. But if he's staging a coup under the cover of the wedding, he'll modify the route, Alira finished, stepping closer to examine the display. The ceremonial hall is too public, too open. He'll want somewhere more controlled. She scanned the palace layout. Years of living within its walls, giving her insights the humans lacked. The ancestral chamber, she said finally, pointing to a secluded section of the palace. It's where royal oaths are traditionally sealed, private, heavily guarded, and with only one entrance. If he wants to control the ceremony completely, that's where he'll hold it. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. That would make sense tactically. Limit access. Control the narrative. But how do we get the princess there without being captured immediately? Shur asked. The same way any bride arrives at her wedding, Alira said. Through the ceremonial procession. Marcus looked skeptical. You think Valkor will just let you waltz up to the palace gates? Not me, Alira clarified. Us. The tradition calls for the bride to be escorted by her intended's family or representatives. In this case, that would be you and your officers. Captain. So we just pretend nothing happened? Show up as planned for the wedding procession? Exactly. Valkor won't risk exposing his lies publicly. If I appear willingly with my human escort, he'll have to adapt his plans. And that's when he'll make mistakes. Marcus and Shai considered this for a moment, communicating silently. In that way, Alira had noticed military personnel often did. It could work, Shai admitted finally. Risky as hell, but it could work. I'll need proper attire, Alira continued, warming to the plan. I can't arrive for my wedding looking like this. She gestured to her rumpled ceremonial clothes from the previous night. That we can arrange, Marcus assured her. But first, there's something you need to see. Something that might help you understand what we're really fighting against. Alira frowned. What do you mean? Get changed, Marcus said, indicating a small package Shur had placed on a side table. We're going to take a little tour of the human quarter before we start planning a palace infiltration. A tour, Alira repeated incredulously. We're in the middle of a crisis, and you want to show me the sights? Not the sights. Princess, Marcus corrected. The truth. If we're going to risk our lives together tomorrow, you should know exactly who you're fighting for, and against. The clothing Lieutenant Shur had provided was unlike anything Alira had ever worn. Simple, functional garments made of sturdy but comfortable fabric, designed to blend in rather than stand out. There were no royal insignias, no ceremonial adornments, nothing that would identify her as Vierian nobility. Just a plain tunic, pants, and a hooded cloak to conceal her distinctive, silver-flecked skin. I look like a commoner, she complained, as she emerged from the bedroom. You look inconspicuous, Marcus corrected, which is exactly what we need right now. He, too, had changed out of his military uniform into civilian clothes. Though Alira noted, He still wore his sidearm concealed beneath his jacket. Lieutenant Shy, similarly attired, would remain at the safe house to coordinate with their intelligence assets. "Remember," Shy warned as they prepared to leave, "the entire city is on alert. Patrols are looking for the princess and any human military personnel. Keep your hood up, your head down, and let the captain do the talking." Alira bristled at being instructed like a child, but held her tongue. These were not her palace halls, and for once, she was not the authority on proper protocol. The streets of the human quarter were even more overwhelming in daylight. The crystalline clarity that characterized Vierian architecture was entirely absent here, replaced by a hodgepodge of materials and styles, some imported from Earth, others adapted from local resources. The streets were narrow and winding, unlike the broad, ordered boulevards of the Vierian districts, and they teemed with life in all its messy variety. Humans of all shapes, sizes, and colors moved through the quarter, along with a surprising number of other species, traders, and diplomats from various worlds, all conducting business that would never be permitted in the rarefied atmosphere of the Vierian upper city. "Keep close," Marcus murmured as he guided her through the crowds. "The market can get chaotic." Market was an understatement. It was a riot of colors, sounds, and scents, vendors calling out their wares in a dozen languages, cooking smoke rising from food stalls, the metallic clatter of machinery being demonstrated and haggled over. Alira found herself overwhelmed by the sensory assault. Her entire life had been spent in controlled environments, where every sight, sound, and smell was carefully curated for aesthetic harmony. This was chaos. And yet, there was a vitality to it that she couldn't deny. Marcus led her through the market to its far edge, where the buildings grew more dilapidated and the crowds thinned. Here, Alira noticed something that hadn't been apparent in the busier sections: makeshift shelters erected in alleys and doorways, occupied by humans who looked thin and weary. And, "What is this place?" she asked quietly. "The refugee sector," Marcus replied. "These are survivors from the Drazic attacks on human colonies in the outer systems. They came here seeking asylum after their worlds were destroyed." Alira had heard reports of the Drazic campaigns against human settlements, of course, but they had been clinical briefings, statistics on holographic displays in War Council meetings. Seeing the actual survivors, children with haunted eyes, elders with expressions of quiet dignity despite their circumstances, was entirely different. "Why are they living like this?" she asked. "Why haven't they been given proper accommodations?" Marcus's expression hardened slightly. "Vierian immigration policy restricts non-citizens to the human quarter, and Vierian housing subsidies don't extend to human refugees. These people get by on charity from the human military and whatever work they can find." "I didn't know," Alira said, the words feeling inadequate even as she spoke them. "No," Marcus agreed. "You wouldn't have. That's the point of this tour, Princess. To show you what happens outside the palace walls, in the real world where most of us live." He led her onward, past a building where human medical personnel were treating patients in what appeared to be a makeshift clinic. "We're chronically short on medical supplies," Marcus explained as they passed. "The Vierian healing centers have technology that could save hundreds of lives, but access is restricted to citizens only." Alira felt a growing unease. These conditions were wrong. Her parents had always taught her that a ruler's first duty was to all people within their borders, not just their own kind. Had those policies changed under Valkor's regency, or had she simply never been allowed to see the truth? Their next stop was a small temple, a simple structure with none of the grandeur of Vierian spiritual centers, but clean and well-maintained. Inside, a diverse group of humans was gathered, listening to an elderly woman speak. "This is one of the few places where humans can gather freely," Marcus whispered, as they stood at the back of the assembly. Religious gatherings are protected under the old treaties, though Valcor has tried several times to restrict them. The elder was speaking of hope, of perseverance, of a future where humans and Vierians might truly live as equals. Her words were not angry or revolutionary, simply a vision of a better world, delivered with quiet conviction. Alira found herself moved, despite her lingering prejudices. There was a dignity to these people that contradicted everything she had been taught about humans. They were not primitive or unclean. They were survivors, adapting to circumstances that would have broken many Vierians accustomed to privilege. As they left the temple, Marcus guided her toward their final destination, a small memorial garden tucked between buildings. Here, holographic images floated among carefully tended plants, each depicting a person or a place. "What is this?" Alira asked. "Our remembrance garden," Marcus replied softly. "For those lost to the Drazek, and for the worlds we can never return to." Alira moved among the holograms, studying the faces, young and old, all human, all gone. And then she stopped before one particular display that showed not a person, but a landscape, rolling hills covered in strange blue vegetation under a sky with 3 small moons. "New Eden," Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. "My homeworld, destroyed by the Drazek 5 years ago, population of 8 million, survivors, fewer than 10,000. Alira turned to look at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time. "Your family." "Gone," he said simply. "Along with everyone and everything I grew up with." "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words feeling wholly inadequate. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Princess," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm telling you because you need to understand what the alliance between our peoples really means. It's not just politics or strategy. For humans, it's survival. And I believe it's just as crucial for Vierians, whether they realize it or not." He turned to face her fully. "The Drazek don't stop. They consume world after world, stripping them of resources and moving on. Humans know this. We've experienced it. Vierians haven't yet. But if we don't stand together, they will." Alira thought of the palace, of the court intrigues and petty power struggles that had consumed so much of her attention. How trivial they seemed now, against the backdrop of worlds destroyed and millions of lives lost. "And Valcor," she asked, "where does he stand in all this?" Marcus's expression darkened. "Our intelligence suggests he's been in communication with Drazek representatives for months. We believe he's negotiating a separate peace, one that would sacrifice human territories to protect VR, at least temporarily." "He wouldn't," Alira said, but without conviction. After what she had seen in the past day, she could no longer be certain of anything she thought she knew about her regent. "Wouldn't he?" Marcus challenged gently. "If it meant securing his power, if it meant continuing the policies that keep your people separated from mine, that maintain the illusion of Vierian superiority?" Alira had no answer. The foundations of her world were crumbling, revealing ugly truths beneath the beautiful crystalline surface. "Come," Marcus said after a moment. "We should get back. There's much to plan before tomorrow." As they made their way through the human quarter, Alira found herself looking at everything with new eyes. The humans around her were no longer alien creatures to be avoided, but people. People with hopes, fears, and dignity, despite their circumstances. And when Marcus occasionally placed a guiding hand on her arm to navigate through crowded areas, she found herself no longer recoiling from his touch. It was just a hand, warm, solid, human. Different from her own. Yes, but not unclean. Not disgusting. Just different. By the time they returned to the safe house, a fundamental shift had occurred within Alira. One she was only beginning to recognize herself. The wedding tomorrow would still be a political arrangement, a means to an end. But for the first time, she wondered if it might also be something more. A true beginning, rather than merely a duty to be endured. Lieutenant Shy was waiting for them, her expression grim. "We have a problem," she announced as soon as they entered. "A big one." "What's happened?" Marcus asked, immediately alert. "We managed to access the palace communications network," Schur explained, gesturing to a holographic display showing intercepted messages. "Valcor has moved up the wedding ceremony to tonight, instead of tomorrow. And he's added something to the traditional ritual." "What has he added?" Alira asked, a sense of dread growing within her. "The binding of wills," Schur said. "An ancient Vierian ritual that hasn't been used in centuries." Alira gasped. "That's impossible. The binding of wills was outlawed by my great-grandmother. It's forbidden." "What exactly is this ritual?" Marcus asked, looking between the two women. "It's not just a ceremonial binding," Alira explained, her voice shaking slightly. "It's a true psychic link, enforced through ancient technology. It was originally used to ensure the loyalty of political marriages in more barbaric times. The submissive partner's will becomes bound to the dominant partner's desires." "Mind control," Marcus translated bluntly. "Not exactly," Alira corrected. "The bound partner retains their own mind and thoughts, but cannot act against the explicit wishes of the dominant partner. It was outlawed because it's fundamentally a form of enslavement. And Valcor intends to use this on you," Marcus concluded, "to ensure you publicly support whatever story he's created about the attack and the humans." Alira nodded, her face pale. "The ritual requires the High Priestess to perform it. Leora must be cooperating with him." "Not necessarily willingly," Shai pointed out. "We've received reports that the priesthood has been placed under protective custody since the attack." Marcus paced the small room, his military mind clearly working through scenarios. "This changes our approach. We can no longer risk having you present for the ceremony. Princess, if Valcor manages to complete this binding ritual, we have to stop it entirely," Alira interrupted. "Not just avoid it. If Valcor is willing to resurrect forbidden technologies for this, he's grown more desperate and more dangerous than I realized." "The question is how," Schur said pragmatically. "Our original plan relied on using the ceremonial procession to get you into the palace. But if Valcor has moved everything up to tonight and placed the priesthood under guard, that approach is no longer viable." A heavy silence fell over the room as they each contemplated the seemingly impossible task before them. How could they infiltrate a heavily guarded palace, interrupt a ceremony already in progress, and expose Valcor's treachery, all without getting killed in the process? It was Alira who finally broke the silence. "I have an idea," she said slowly. "But you're not going to like it, Captain." "I'm listening," Marcus replied, his expression guarded. "The binding of wills requires consent, at least nominally," Alira explained. "Both parties must touch the bonding crystal simultaneously to activate the link. Historically, the submissive partner was coerced or threatened into compliance, but the physical act of touching the crystal had to be performed willingly. So Valcor needs you to cooperate." Marcus nodded. "But how does that help us? You won't be there." "But you will," Alira said. "As my intended. You're still expected at the ceremony. Valcor won't reveal that I'm missing until the last possible moment. He'll want to maintain the illusion of normalcy as long as possible." Marcus frowned. "You want me to walk into what is almost certainly a trap?" "I want you to stall," Alira corrected. "Create confusion. Demand to see me. Force Valcor to admit publicly that I'm not present. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Shi and I will use the distraction to enter the palace through the servant passages. My handmaiden, Nyla, if she hasn't been arrested, can help us reach the ancestral chamber." "And then what?" Shai asked skeptically. "Even if we get there, we'll be outnumbered and outgunned." "We don't need weapons," Alira said. "We need witnesses." She pointed to the communications display. "Can you broadcast from inside the palace? Stream what happens to all of VR?" Shai considered this. "Theoretically, yes, if we can access a royal communications terminal. But that won't be easy." "I know every terminal in the palace," Alira assured her. "And more importantly, I know the override codes that even Valcor doesn't have access to. My father made sure I memorized them before he died." Marcus and Shai exchanged looks, silently evaluating the plan. "It's risky," Marcus said finally. "A lot of things have to go right, and we'll be separated for most of it." "Do you have a better idea?" Alira challenged. Marcus sighed. No, I don't." He studied her for a long moment. "You've changed since yesterday, Princess." "Have I?" Alira asked, though she knew the answer. The sheltered royal who had recoiled at a human's touch seemed like a stranger now, a naive girl who had never seen the world beyond palace walls. "Or perhaps I'm simply becoming who I was always meant to be." Marcus smiled slightly. "Either way, I find I rather like this version of my future wife." The word wife sent an unexpected flutter through Alira's chest. Until now, the marriage had been an abstract concept, a political necessity to be endured. But standing here with this human, planning to risk their lives together to save both their peoples, the word suddenly carried new meaning. "Let's be clear, Captain," she said, maintaining her royal composure despite the confusing emotions. "If we survive this, the marriage will still be a political arrangement. Nothing more." "Of course, Princess," Marcus agreed, though the slight curl of his lip suggested he didn't entirely believe her, or perhaps didn't entirely believe himself. Nothing more than two people from different worlds, standing together against tyranny and prejudice. Purely political. Lieutenant Shai cleared her throat. "If you two are finished with whatever this is, we have a coup to stop and a war to prevent. Shall we get to work?" Night fell over the capital city of VR, the twin moons rising to illuminate the crystalline spires in ethereal light. In the palace, final preparations for the hastily rearranged wedding ceremony were underway. Servants rushing to transfer decorations and ceremonial items from the grand hall to the more intimate and more secure ancestral chamber. Regent Valcor stood in the center of the chamber, watching the preparations with cold satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The human captain would arrive, expecting a traditional ceremony. Instead, he would be arrested as a conspirator in the princess's kidnapping. The binding crystal was already in place on the ceremonial altar, its ancient technology reactivated after centuries of disuse. "Is everything prepared, High Priestess?" Valcor asked the robed figure standing nearby. Leora's face was a mask of ceremonial dignity, but her eyes betrayed her discomfort. "The ritual is prepared as you commanded, Regent, but I must again protest the use of the binding. It was outlawed for good reason." "Your protest is noted," Valcor said dismissively, "and irrelevant. When the princess is recovered, she will require guidance to overcome the trauma of her captivity. The binding will ensure she makes appropriate decisions during this difficult time." "And if she is not recovered in time for the ceremony?" Leora asked carefully. Valcor's smile was thin and cold. "Then Captain Holt will face justice for his crimes against the crown, and you will perform the binding between the princess and myself upon her return, to ensure her emotional recovery. Of course." Leora's eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing more. The true nature of Valcor's coup was becoming clear, and she had no power to stop it, not alone. Outside the palace gates, Marcus approached in full dress uniform, flanked by a small honor guard of human officers. His face was composed, revealing nothing of the tension he felt knowing that Alira and Lieutenant Shai were, even now, attempting to infiltrate the palace through the servant quarters. The palace guards regarded the human delegation with open hostility, their hands resting on their weapons. "Captain Holt," the guard captain acknowledged stiffly. "You are expected. Your officers must remain outside." "That contradicts the ceremonial protocols," Marcus objected smoothly. "The groom's honor guard traditionally accompanies him to the altar. Protocols have been adjusted due to security concerns," the guard replied. "You alone are permitted entry." Marcus nodded, as if accepting this change, though it confirmed their suspicions that Valcor was altering the ceremony to isolate him. "Very well, lead on." As he was escorted through the palace corridors, Marcus took careful note of the security presence, far heavier than would be normal for a wedding, with armed guards at every intersection. Not the actions of a regent preparing for a joyous royal occasion, but rather of one expecting or planning violence. Meanwhile, in the servant quarters beneath the palace, Alira and Shai moved cautiously through narrow passages, guided by Nyla, Alira's handmaiden who had received their encoded message and agreed to help. The young Vierian woman had been shocked to see her princess dressed in plain clothes and accompanied by a human officer, but had asked no questions. "The ancestral chamber has been sealed except for authorized personnel," Nyla whispered, as they navigated the dimly lit corridors. "But there is a maintenance passage that runs behind the chamber walls. It was used in ancient times by servants who tended the eternal flames during ceremonies." "Will it get us close enough to see and hear what happens?" Alira asked. Nyla nodded. "There are small observation ports in the walls, disguised as decorative elements. They allowed servants to monitor the flames without being visible to the noble attendees." "Perfect," Shai murmured. "And the communications terminal?" "The nearest royal terminal is in the antechamber," Nyla replied. "But it will be guarded." "Let me worry about that," Alira said. "Just get us to the maintenance passage." As they moved deeper into the palace, Alira felt a strange mixture of emotions. This was her home, the place she had lived her entire life, and yet now she was sneaking through it like an intruder. The familiar corridors and chambers seemed suddenly alien, as if the betrayal by Valcor had transformed the very nature of the palace itself. "Princess," Nyla whispered, hesitating at a junction. "Before we go further, I must ask, is it true what they're saying? That the humans kidnapped you?" Alira met her handmaiden's worried gaze. "No, Nyla. The humans saved me from assassins sent by Regent Valcor. He's attempting to seize power and break the alliance with Earth." Nyla's eyes widened. "The Regent? But why would he—" "Politics," Shai cut in tersely. "We can explain later. Right now, we need to move." Nyla nodded, though her expression remained troubled. She led them through a concealed door into a narrow passage that smelled of dust and disuse. "This way to the ancestral chamber." In the chamber itself, Marcus had been positioned before the ceremonial altar, facing Regent Valcor and High Priestess Leora. A small audience of Vierian nobles watched from arranged seating, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and barely concealed hostility. "Captain Holt," Valcor greeted, his voice carrying through the chamber. "You honor us with your punctuality, especially in these troubled times." "Where is Princess Alira?" Marcus asked directly, dispensing with formalities. A ripple of murmurs ran through the assembled nobles. Valcor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I was about to ask you the same question, Captain. After all, it was human agents who were seen taking her from the palace during last night's unfortunate attack." "That's a lie," Marcus stated flatly. "The princess was targeted by assassins. I helped her escape." "An interesting interpretation," Valcor replied smoothly. "Yet, she remains conveniently absent, while you appear on schedule for a ceremony that cannot proceed without her. One might almost suspect a plot to embarrass the royal house of VR. "The only plot here is yours, Regent," Marcus countered, projecting his voice to ensure all present could hear. You orchestrated the attack to eliminate the princess and blame humans for her death, giving you an excuse to break the alliance and seize power for yourself. The noble attendees erupted in shocked exclamations. Valkor's face darkened with anger, his composure slipping for the first time. "Guards!" he barked. "Arrest this human for treason against the crown!" Palace guards moved forward, weapons raised. Marcus stood his ground, unarmed but defiant. "Think carefully, Valkor," he warned. "Killing an Earth military officer will be an act of war. Is that what you want? To fight humans and the Drazek simultaneously?" "What I want," Valkor snarled, "is to cleanse VR of human filth and restore proper order. Your kind has corrupted our culture long enough with your talk of alliances and cooperation. VR stands alone, as it always has." In the hidden passage behind the chamber walls, Alira, she, and Nyla had reached the observation ports. Through the small openings, they could see and hear everything unfolding in the chamber. "He's completely lost it," Shai whispered. "We need to move now." Alira nodded, her heart racing. "Nyla, stay here. Lieutenant, with me." She turned to her handmaiden. "If anything happens to us, find Tutor Saris. Tell him everything you've seen and heard." Nyla clasped Alira's hand briefly. "Be careful, Princess." Alira and Shai backtracked through the passage to the junction that would lead them to the antechamber and the communications terminal. As they had expected, 2 guards stood watch outside the ornate doors. "Follow my lead," Alira whispered to Shai. Then she straightened her posture, adjusted her plain clothes as best she could, and stepped into the corridor with the regal bearing that had been drilled into her since birth. "Guards!" she called out, her voice carrying the unmistakable tone of royal command. "Attend me!" The guards spun toward her, weapons half raised before recognition dawned in their eyes. "But Princess," one stammered, You're alive." "Obviously," Alira replied coolly. "And I require immediate access to the Royal Communications Terminal." The guards exchanged uncertain glances. "But Regent Valkor said you were kidnapped by humans." "Do I look kidnapped to you?" Alira demanded. "The Regent has been deceiving you, deceiving all of VR. Now stand aside, or be charged with obstructing the crown." Years of conditioning to obey royal authority warred with the guards' recent orders. Alira held her breath, maintaining her imperious expression through sheer force of will. Finally, the senior guard stepped aside. "Yes, Your Highness." Alira swept past them into the antechamber, Shir close behind. The moment the doors closed, she rushed to the communications terminal embedded in the crystalline wall. "How long will this take?" Shar asked, keeping watch on the doors. "Seconds," Alira replied, her fingers dancing across the interface. "My father ensured I knew every royal override code. Valkor never bothered to learn them. He always had technicians handle such matters." The terminal came to life, bypassing the security protocols Valkor had established. Alira quickly accessed the palace-wide communication system, and then, with a deeper set of codes, the planetary broadcast network. "We're connected," she announced. "Now we just need to—" The antechamber doors burst open. Regent Valkor stood there, flanked by palace guards with weapons drawn, his face contorted with shock and fury at the sight of Alira. "Seize them!" he ordered. Shai drew her concealed sidearm, but was quickly overwhelmed by the guards. Alira, still at the terminal, pressed the final activation sequence before she was roughly pulled away. "It's too late. Valkor," she said, a grim smile of triumph on her face. "The communication system is active. Everything happening in the ancestral chamber is now being broadcast to all of VR." Valkor's face paled, then flushed with rage. "It doesn't matter," he spat. "The people will believe what I tell them to believe. And once you've undergone the binding, you'll confirm every word." He turned to the guards. "Bring them to the chamber. The ceremony will proceed as planned, with some adjustments." The guards dragged Alira and Shai into the ancestral chamber, where Marcus stood surrounded by armed guards. His eyes widened at the sight of Alira, relief and concern battling across his features. "Princess," he called out, "are you all right?" "I'm fine, Captain," she replied, maintaining her dignity despite the guards' rough handling. "Though it seems our plan has encountered some complications." Valcor strode to the center of the chamber, addressing the now confused noble attendees. "Esteemed lords and ladies of VR, a most fortunate development. Our beloved Princess Alira has been recovered from her human captors. Clearly, she has been subjected to alien influence, perhaps even primitive human mind control techniques." Murmurs of outrage rippled through the audience. "Fortunately," Valcor continued, "we are prepared to remedy this violation. The ancient binding ritual will cleanse her mind of human corruption and restore her true Viarian spirit." "The binding?" one elderly noble gasped. "But that practice was outlawed generations ago." "Extraordinary times require extraordinary measures," Valcor replied smoothly. "High Priestess, prepare the ritual." Leora stepped forward, her face troubled. "Regent, I must formally protest this action. The binding can only be performed with the willing participation of both parties." "And it shall be," Valcor assured her. "The princess will touch the crystal willingly, unless she wishes to see her human friends executed on the spot." He gestured to where Marcus and Shai were held at gunpoint. Alira's mind raced. The broadcast was active. All of VR was witnessing Valcor's madness. But that wouldn't save them from immediate death if she refused to cooperate. "Who would be the dominant partner in this binding?" she asked, playing for time. "Captain Holt, as originally intended?" Valcor laughed coldly. "The human? Certainly not. As your guardian and regent, I will assume that responsibility, temporarily, of course, until you have recovered from your ordeal." And there it was, Valcor's true plan exposed. Not just to break the alliance, but to control Alira completely, using her as a puppet queen, while he held the true power. "I see," Alira said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "And if I refuse?" "Then your human friends die first," Valcor said simply, "followed by anyone else who has aided you, including your loyal handmaiden, whom I noticed is conspicuously absent from her duties." Alira glanced at Marcus, seeing in his eyes that he was prepared to die, rather than see her enslaved through the binding ritual. Lieutenant Shah's expression was similarly resolved. But Alira had not come this far to lose now, not when the truth was finally being revealed to all of VR. "Very well," she said, seeming to slump in defeat. "I will participate in the ritual." Valcor's triumphant smile sent chills down her spine. "Excellent. High Priestess, proceed." Leora stepped forward reluctantly, beginning the ancient invocation that would activate the binding crystal on the altar. Its faceted surface began to glow with an eerie light as the priestess chanted, illuminating the chamber with pulsing energy. "The partners will now approach the crystal," Leora instructed, her voice heavy with reluctance. "They must touch it simultaneously, with intent to bond." Guards pushed Alira forward until she stood before the altar, facing Valcor across the glowing crystal. His eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. "Once the binding is complete," he said quietly, for her ears alone, "your first command will be to denounce the humans and support the new alliance I've negotiated with the Drazek. Your second will be to abdicate the throne in my favor." Poetic, isn't it? "Extremely," Alira agreed, her voice cold. "There's just one problem with your plan. Valcor."
"Oh, and what is that, my dear princess?"
Alira smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "I choose who I bond with." In a swift motion, she turned away from Valcor and locked eyes with Marcus across the chamber. "Captain Holt, your hand!" Understanding flashed across Marcus's face. With a sudden surge of strength, He broke free from his surprised guards and lunged toward the altar, extending his hand toward the crystal. Valcor roared in fury, reaching for the crystal himself. But Alira was faster. Her fingers touched the glowing surface at the exact moment Marcus's hand reached it from the other side. The binding crystal flared with blinding light, its energy surging between the two connected parties. Not Alira and Valcor, but Alira and Marcus. The ancient technology, designed to create an unbreakable bond between two willing participants, responded to their genuine choice rather than Valcor's coercion. "No!" Valcor screamed as the ritual energy crackled through the chamber. "Guards, stop them!" But the guards hesitated, confused by the unexpected turn of events and unwilling to interfere with a sacred ritual in progress. In their moment of uncertainty, Lieutenant Schur seized her opportunity, breaking free and retrieving her weapon. The nobles in attendance had risen to their feet, watching in astonishment as the binding ritual, forbidden for generations, unfolded before them. And not just before them. Alira knew, but before all of VR through the active broadcast. As the crystal's light enveloped Alira and Marcus, she felt something, not the subjugation she had feared, but a connection, a sense of his courage, his determination, his fundamental decency. And from his widened eyes, she knew he was experiencing something similar from her. "This is impossible," Valcor sputtered as the ritual light began to fade. "The binding can only occur between Vierians. A human cannot." "Cannot what?" "Regent," Alira challenged, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "Cannot form a true bond? Cannot be worthy of connection? Your prejudice has blinded you to the truth that my ancestors understood. We are all people, regardless of origin. That is why the alliance was formed. That is why this marriage was arranged. Not to subjugate, but to unite." She turned to address the noble attendees and, through the broadcast, all of VR. "Citizens of VR, you have witnessed Regent Valcor's attempted coup. His plot to control me through forbidden technology, to break our alliance with Earth, and to surrender our outer territories to the Drazek Imperium." Gasps and exclamations of shock rippled through the audience. "These accusations are absurd," Valcor blustered, but his composure was cracking. "The princess has clearly been corrupted by human influence." "The only corruption here is yours." "Valcor," came a new voice from the chamber entrance. Tutor Sarah stood there, supported by Nyla, his aged face bearing marks of recent mistreatment, but his eyes clear and determined. "I have accessed the Regent's private communications," Saras announced. "The evidence of his treachery is irrefutable. Negotiations with Drazek representatives, orders for the assassination attempts against the princess, falsified reports about human aggression, all documented in his own words." Valcor's face contorted with rage. He drew a concealed weapon and aimed it directly at Alira. "If I cannot rule VR, then neither shall you." But before he could fire, Marcus moved with lightning speed, placing himself between Alira and the weapon. At the same moment, Lieutenant Shai fired her recovered sidearm, striking Valcor's hand. The Regent's weapon clattered to the floor as he howled in pain. Palace guards, seeing the evidence of Valcor's treachery with their own eyes, moved to restrain him. The noble attendees were on their feet, some calling for immediate justice, others simply staring in shock at the revelations. "The binding," Leora said quietly, approaching Alira and Marcus. "It formed between you, a human, and a Vierian. In all our recorded history, such a thing has never occurred." "Perhaps," Alira suggested. "Your histories are incomplete, High Priestess. Or perhaps this is simply the beginning of a new chapter." She turned to Marcus, who stood close beside her, still positioned protectively, though the danger had passed. "Captain, it seems our political arrangement has become somewhat more complicated." A smile tugged at his lips. So it would appear. Princess, do you regret it? Alira considered the question seriously. The binding between them was not the controlling force Valcor had intended to use, but it was real, nonetheless, a connection that could not be easily broken. She had acted on instinct, choosing Marcus over Valcor without fully considering the implications. No, she said finally. I don't regret it. Perhaps this is what true choice feels like. The aftermath of what would later be called the ancestral chamber coup unfolded with dizzying speed. Valcor was taken into custody, his communications records examined, and his co-conspirators identified. The evidence of his negotiations with the Drazek was presented to the High Council, sending shockwaves through Viarian society. Many who had quietly supported his xenophobic policies were now scrambling to distance themselves from his treason. In the days that followed, Alira found herself at the center of a political maelstrom. With Valcor removed, the legal barriers to her coronation had vanished. The High Council, embarrassed by their complicity in Valcor's regency, fast-tracked the process. In less than a week, she would officially become Queen of VR. But first, there was the matter of her interrupted wedding. The alliance must still be formalized, Tutor Saras advised, as they sat in the royal study, now restored to Alira's use. His injuries from Valcor's interrogation were healing slowly, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. The binding you share with Captain Holt is unprecedented, but it is not a legally recognized union in either Viarian or human tradition. I'm aware, Alira said, gazing out at the twin moons rising over the palace spires. But much has changed since the marriage was arranged. Perhaps the terms should be reconsidered. You wish to annul the arrangement? Saras asked, his weathered face creasing with concern. No, Alira replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. But I wish to transform it. The original agreement was crafted under Valcor's influence, with terms that subtly reinforced Viarian superiority. That is not the foundation I want for a lasting alliance. Saras nodded thoughtfully. What do you propose instead? A true partnership, Alira said. Equal terms, equal responsibilities, equal benefits for both peoples. She turned to face her old mentor. And a ceremony that honors both traditions, not just ours. A smile spread across Saras's face. Your parents would be proud of you, Alira. This is the vision they had before their deaths, a vision Valcor worked so hard to erase. Alira felt a pang at the mention of her parents. Do you think? Was their accident truly an accident? Saras. The old tutor's expression grew somber. The investigation continues, but preliminary findings suggest their shuttle's navigation system was tampered with. Valcor's treachery likely began long before your wedding was arranged. Alira closed her eyes briefly, absorbing this painful confirmation of her suspicions. When she opened them again, her resolve had only strengthened. Then I will complete what they started. VR and Earth will stand together, not just against the Drazek, but for a better future. And Captain Holt? Saras asked gently. What role will he play in this future? Alira's thoughts turned to Marcus. Since the events in the ancestral chamber, they had seen little of each other. He had returned to the human quarter to liaise with Earth authorities, while she had been consumed with stabilizing the government. The binding between them remained, a subtle awareness of each other's presence, a connection she was still learning to understand. That, she said, is a conversation I need to have with him directly. She found Marcus at the Remembrance Garden in the human quarter, standing before the hologram of his lost homeworld. He turned at her approach, and she saw in his eyes that he had sensed her coming. Another effect of the binding. Perhaps. Princess, he greeted her, offering a formal bow that somehow felt out of place after all they had shared. Alira, she corrected gently. I think we're beyond titles now, don't you? A small smile touched his lips. I suppose we are, Alira. Hearing her name in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. She moved to stand beside him, gazing at the holographic landscape of New Eden.
It was beautiful,
she said softly. Yes, he agreed. It was. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, and Alira marveled at how comfortable it felt to be in his presence. The revulsion she had once felt at the thought of being near a human seemed like a distant memory, a prejudice belonging to someone else entirely. The coronation is in 5 days, she said finally. The wedding, if you still wish it, would be the day after. Marcus turned to look at her directly. If I still wish it? I think that question should be directed to you, Alira. This arrangement was never my choice to make.
But you volunteered, she reminded him.
I did, he acknowledged. Because I believed in the alliance. I still do. But the circumstances have changed. He gestured vaguely between them. This binding, we don't fully understand what it means, what it might require of us.
Are you afraid of it?
Alira asked, genuinely curious. Marcus considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Not afraid. No, but cautious. It connects us in ways neither of our peoples have experienced before. That carries both opportunity and risk.
A diplomatic answer,
Alira observed with a hint of amusement. I am still a diplomat, among other things, he replied, matching her tone. Then his expression grew more serious. But if you're asking for my honest feelings rather than my professional assessment, then no. I'm not afraid of being connected to you, Alira. In fact, I find I rather welcome it. The frankness of his answer touched something deep within her. This was what had drawn her to him in that crucial moment in the ancestral chamber. His fundamental honesty, his unwillingness to hide behind diplomatic niceties when something true needed to be said.
I've had the marriage treaty rewritten, she told him. Equal terms, equal status for both parties. No more subtle language of Vierian primacy.
A significant change, Marcus noted. How has the council responded? With predictable resistance, Alira admitted. But recent events have somewhat weakened their position, and public opinion has shifted dramatically since the broadcast of Valkor's attempted coup. So I've heard, Marcus said. Apparently, the sight of a human willing to die protecting the princess has made quite an impression on the Vierian populace.
As has the revelation that our regent was secretly negotiating with the Drazek,
Alira added.
People who once despised humans are now reconsidering which species truly threatens Vierian independence.
They fell silent again, watching as the holographic moons of New Eden completed their cycle. The program restarting its eternal loop of a world that no longer existed. If we do this, Marcus said finally, if we proceed with this marriage, it won't just be politics anymore, not with the binding between us. Are you prepared for that? Alira thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment, from the sheltered princess who had recoiled at a human's touch to the woman who now stood comfortably beside one, connected to him in ways neither of them fully understood.
I'm not sure anyone can be fully prepared for something unprecedented, she said honestly. But I am willing to discover what it means together. Are you?
Marcus's eyes met hers, and through their bond, she felt the certainty of his answer even before he spoke it aloud. Yes, he said simply. I am. 5 days later, Alira stood before the assembled dignitaries of VR and representatives from a dozen human colonies. The coronation ceremony had been traditional in form, but revolutionary in content. Her vows had included explicit commitments to both Vierian and human citizens, a first in the planet's history. Now, with the crown of VR resting upon her head, she prepared to take another unprecedented step. The wedding ceremony had been redesigned from the ground up, incorporating elements from both cultures and explicitly rejecting the hierarchical nature of traditional Vierian unions. As she waited in the antechamber, Alira found herself unexpectedly nervous, not about the political implications, Those she had carefully calculated and prepared for? No. Her nerves stemmed from something far more personal. The realization that today, she would not just be formalizing an alliance but beginning a life partnered with someone who had been a stranger mere days ago. "Nervous?" a familiar voice asked. Tutor Saris approached, looking more rested than he had since his ordeal under Valkor's imprisonment. "Is it that obvious?" Alira asked. "Only to someone who has known you since childhood," Saras assured her. "To everyone else, you are the very image of royal composure." Alira smiled. "I've had excellent training." Saras's expression grew more serious. "Your Majesty, Alira, before you take this final step, I must ask, are you certain this is what you want? Not just the alliance, but the marriage itself?" Alira considered the question carefully. "A week ago, I would have said I was merely doing my duty. Now," she paused, searching for the right words. "Now I find that duty and desire have become surprisingly aligned." A smile creased Saras's aged face. "Then I am happy for you, my child, truly happy." The ceremonial chimes sounded, signaling that it was time. Alira straightened her ceremonial attire, still elaborately Vierian in design, but now complemented with subtle elements of human tradition, and prepared to enter the Great Hall. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ritual and symbolism. Alira was conscious of the hundreds of eyes upon them, of the historical significance of each carefully crafted element. But most of all, she was aware of Marcus standing beside her. Through their bond, she could sense his calm determination, his quiet joy, and something deeper that she was not yet ready to name. When the moment came to seal their union, there was no binding crystal this time. That connection already existed between them. Instead, in a gesture that merged human custom with Vierian tradition, they extended their hands toward each other. Alira hesitated for just a moment, remembering her initial horror at the thought of touching a human skin. How distant that fear seemed now, how rooted in ignorance and prejudice rather than truth. With deliberate grace, she placed her silver-flecked hand in Marcus's. His fingers closed gently around hers, warm and solid and real. A murmur ran through the Vierian attendees. Such public contact between species was still shocking to many, but Alira paid it no mind. This was not just a political gesture, but a personal choice, freely made. "With this union," the High Priestess Leora proclaimed, her voice carrying throughout the Great Hall, "a new chapter begins, not just for two people, but for two peoples. May the wisdom of both worlds guide your path forward." The formal reception that followed was a careful diplomatic dance, with Alira and Marcus moving between human and Vierian dignitaries, cementing alliances and beginning the long work of true integration. Lieutenant Shai, now officially appointed as human liaison to the royal court, proved unexpectedly adept at smoothing cultural misunderstandings before they could escalate. It was late in the evening when Alira finally managed to escape the endless conversations and congratulations. She found herself drawn to the palace gardens, seeking a moment of quiet reflection before facing what would come next. The private culmination of the wedding ceremony. The twin moons of VR hung in the night sky, just as they had a week ago when she had stood on her balcony, dreading the marriage that lay ahead. How much had changed in so short a time? She sensed Marcus's approach before she heard him, the binding between them creating an awareness that transcended ordinary perception. "Escaping the festivities?" he asked, as he joined her beneath the crystalline arbor that was the centerpiece of the royal gardens. "Seeking perspective," she corrected. "It's been a transformative week." Marcus laughed, the sound warm in the cool night air. "That may be the understatement of the century, Your Majesty." Alira smiled at his use of her new title. "I think, in private at least, we can dispense with such formalities." "As you wish, Alira." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the moonlight play across the crystal formations of the garden. There was an ease between them now that went beyond the binding, a growing friendship built on shared experience and mutual respect. "What happens now?" Alira asked softly, not looking at him. Marcus understood the question behind the question. "Now we build something neither of our worlds has seen before, a true partnership between equals." He paused, then added, "In public and in private." Alira turned to face him fully. In the moonlight, his human features no longer seemed alien to her. Just different, unique, fascinating in their own way. "And if I'm still learning what that means," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "if some of my old hesitations remain?" "Then we learn together," Marcus said simply. "At whatever pace feels right. The binding connects us, but it doesn't dictate the path we take." In that moment, looking into his eyes, Alira felt the last of her ingrained prejudice falling away. This man, this human, had risked his life for her, had stood beside her against treachery, had respected her autonomy even when custom and convenience might have dictated otherwise. If that wasn't nobility, then the concept had no meaning. Slowly, deliberately, she extended her hand toward him, not as part of any ceremony this time, but as a personal choice freely made. Marcus understood the significance of the gesture. He took her offered hand gently, their fingers intertwining. "I never thought I would willingly touch a human," Alira admitted softly. Let alone marry one," Marcus finished for her, a hint of humor in his voice. "Let alone find comfort in one's presence," she corrected, though a smile touched her lips as well. Above them, the twin moons of VR continued their eternal dance across the night sky, bearing witness to something new unfolding beneath their light. Not just a political alliance between worlds, but a bridge between two people who had found their way to each other across the vast gulf of difference. It was just a beginning, fragile and uncertain. But in that moment, under the twin moons, it felt like the most important beginning in the history of two worlds. As Alira stood there, her hand willingly joined with her human husband's, she realized that true freedom had never been about escaping duty. It had been about finding the courage to choose it on her own terms. And perhaps, in time, what had begun as duty might grow into something far more profound. The road ahead would not be easy. Centuries of prejudice and separation could not be undone in a week, or a year, or perhaps even a lifetime. There would be resistance from both sides, setbacks and misunderstandings. The ordinary challenges of any partnership compounded by the extraordinary circumstances of theirs. But as Alira gazed up at the twin moons with Marcus beside her, their hands still joined, she felt something she had rarely experienced in her royal life: hope. Not the cautious optimism of diplomatic negotiations or the abstract promise of political alliances, but a deep, personal hope for the future they might build together. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked softly. Alira turned to him, no longer afraid to meet his gaze directly. "I'm thinking that sometimes the things we fear most are exactly what we need." Marcus smiled, and through their bond, Alira felt the warmth of his response even before he spoke. Then perhaps fear is just the first step on the path to understanding. Perhaps, Alira agreed. And as the twin moons of VR cast their silvery light upon the newly united pair, she took another step on that path, not out of duty or necessity, but out of choice. A choice that, for the first time in her life, felt entirely her own.